Welcome, everybody, to Before the Commit, episode 27. This week, we'll be talking about CMUX and a cool little variant, or let's just say a alternative called Pro. We'll also be talking about a news or noise. The all-you-can-eat buffet of Anthropic Claude is it's over, and of course, in the Kill 'em chain, we're going to be talking about something called Agent Commander, a command and control attack that lets you hijack agents. With me, as usual, I have my friend Dustin Hillgartner. Hey, Dustin, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. Yeah, so a lot's happened since our last episode 3 weeks ago. It's almost like a bunch of things that you could talk about in news or noise. I mean, a lot of the drama seems to center around Anthropic these days. Interestingly enough, I saw something last night. It was an interview with a woman that's an economist, and she was basically saying that that the model providers, the bubble on model providers, is about to burst, and that all this cash has been leveraged around, models are great, but like they're over, and they've been overhyped, and obviously the model providers are not making money on models themselves. There's not lots of gains. And so I was thinking about it, like it's obviously like a prediction, not like no one really knows. But you see this like thing with Anthropic talking about an IPO, and then they're now like looking for ways to the commoditized pricing. If those are not familiar, like Claude has had commoditized pricing for a while. And so when OpenClaw kind of came out, there was a way to kind of have OpenClaw read the keychain and extract the credentials and use that sort of commoditized model. And essentially Claude has banned the use of other agents besides Claude Code from using that sort of commoditized methodology, and now pushing people toward pay-per-use API keys, which is driving lots of people to look for cheaper alternatives rather than actually paying the cost, which could be very expensive, especially if you have a forget about just OpenClaw. Any agent that's running unattended can easily spike your costs if you're not paying attention to it, if you're not governing your costs. So yeah, so this article, the all-you-can-eat buffet is now over. I know I saw a couple people that we follow on X abandoning or calling, them personally not using Claude Code anymore, and probably shifting to use for other things. I have switched out to use Gemini 2.5, which is like a relatively inexpensive, pretty much commoditized model. It's like a certain number of requests you get for free from Google. So anyway, yeah, I thought it would be a good place to start, since most of what we talk about is Claude Code these days.
Yeah, it's interesting. Anthropic's getting a lot of bad press because they've been very unclear about what you can or cannot do with Claude Code specifically. And they're trying to thread the needle. It seems like they must be GPU compressed. They must be running out of GPUs, and they're trying to get all their traffic to fit in. There's been others that have had analysis on this. I think someone else was saying, I think it was Theo, was saying that, it might be that the folks that are using the $200 accounts average not using $200 worth of compute. So it makes sense for Anthropic to have the $200 subscription And then there are some folks who max out the $200 subscription, use all like, the theoretical 5K of compute or whatever folks are saying, 5K of tokens you can use at your $200 account before it maxes out for the week. The theory is that Anthropic, probably makes money off of those folks too, even though they lose money on the fact that they're maxing out their $200 account. Those folks tend to be like engineering leadership. They're employed, they're with some sort of business. And the way you make back the money on them is they're the ones out there doing the blog posts and doing the podcasts and talking about Claude, or, bringing it to their business and telling others to use it. And then came around this OpenClaw concept. And all of a sudden now you have folks that are maxing out their $200 account, but they're probably not economically positive folks from the Anthropic point of view. In other words, they're less likely to be engineering leadership. They're more likely to be just people doing a lot of, random stuff with Claude or with OpenClaw on their machine. Now, in the past, when they've wanted to shut down other products, they've done it based on a header, right? So they've blocked the header from, like, let's say OpenCode from getting to Anthropic. And that's been the way they've done it. And people have kind of been grumbly about that, but accepted it at the end of the day. And there's been theories from folks defending Anthropic that, it has to do with, like, if you don't use Claude Code, you may be mucking up Anthropic in their backend because maybe your harness that you're using isn't leveraging caching properly. You're getting more cache misses. So your traffic is more heavy for them because you're not using their harness, which leverages the caching and everything properly. But then what's interesting is, in order to ban OpenClaw, which they did in the last few days, they couldn't do it based on header because, I don't think it uses a specific header. And then folks could easily get around it. What they did was they actually banned it based on system prompt. So right now, if you go into code and you use, Claude-P through the CLI, and you use the -- whatever it is to override the system prompt, and you just put OpenClaw, the word, in there, you will get blocked.
Right.
It'll fail with a, permission error of some sort. And then if you don't put OpenClaw in there, the prompts will succeed, right? Now, what's interesting is that if you go into your billing and you turn on overage, right, where they have this concept where if you run out of your pro plan or your max plan, it'll start draining this balance that you can pump money in, put a balance in there of cash, and we'll start draining through that cash. If you turn that on and you do a Claude request, once again, just use -P in the command line, and you put OpenClaw in your system header, it will succeed now, but it will start draining through your money in your extra, in your overage account. The other thing that's appeared, that's, there's back and forth on the web about whether or not this is something that Anthropic did, or it's just the probabilisticness of the LLMs behind the scenes, is folks that are using Claude Code to control things on their computer, like, for instance, having it look through, processes running on your laptop, or, just general sort of like IT type stuff on your own machine, right? Like looking through
like running Linux commands or Mac OS commands,
or looking through
whatever.
certificates, I think was the example that Theo had given. Recently, in the last couple of days, ever since they banned OpenClaw, seems to be around the time it started happening for him, at least, it starts to push back on doing things on your machine and starts to say, this would be a better support ticket for, whatever app you have running on your Mac or something like that. And it says, I'm a coding agent. I am more for coding and not for doing things on your machine. And the theory behind that is that they're starting to lock down what Claude Code will do, because that's another way of trying to stop it from doing OpenClaw type stuff. So there's a lot of people that are pretty upset about this, because it's not just a block of OpenClaw, but and you know, the reasoning might be it's hard for them to block OpenClaw. So they've started to lock down Claude Code on what it will do. And that's kind of a little bit of like it's rubbing folks the wrong way. Like,
let me ask you a question.
Let me ask you a question. It won't do something.
Is any so separately? Another thing that happened last week is Anthropic accidentally leaked their entire source code, and it was up long enough where enough people could, you know, fork the repo, clone it, put up other things in GitHub. I mean, there's plenty of forks that are probably not on GitHub. Granted, it's a point-in-time snapshot. I wonder if there's like something related to the leak or spill of the Claude Code source code that has led to some of this as well, not just the OpenClaw stuff.
Well, it's interesting because it's going to be a test of the theory of whether your code actually really matters. Like, there's theories out there that even if your code were to leak, it probably doesn't matter that much, because there's a lot more to your business than just the code. There's the relationships, the contracts, the distribution, etc. And then if the code leaks once, it doesn't mean people get updates. So like eventually your code base gets far enough away from that version that people don't use that old version anymore.
Because they control the models too, so they probably can like fingerprint some of that stuff and block it.
Sure, maybe not, but what I'm getting at is that it'll be a good test of whether this matters or not. I've personally thought that Claude Code is their secret sauce. It's probably one of the most valuable things that Anthropic has right now outside of their models. And I think it's actually hugely destructive to their business to leak it, because I think there's a lot of other harnesses out there that don't operate as well as Claude Code that now are going to be able to look at why, and fast forward ahead to being better at certain tool calls, et cetera, have their prompts dialed in properly, et cetera. I think there's probably a lot of competitors out there to Claude Code that are studying that right now, already have, and have probably gained some insight out of it.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, also, there's a new model that was released today. Claude Mythos. I think me had talked about it already, but essentially it is a tool it's a general purpose model. It's not open to everybody. It's been given out to like a couple of, I would say, bigger firms like Amazon and Microsoft, and it's being used to like discover vulnerabilities in applications. And the timing of it seems kind of, I don't want to make something more than it is, but yeah, one anecdote is that it discovered a 27-year-old bug in OpenBSD as it relates to the TCP protocol.
Yeah. And there was a lot of press around this release that they were going to, they're afraid to release it because it's finding 0 days and they want to release it to a smaller,
exactly.
I want to believe them. But everyone knows how these releases go. You hype it up, you create some sort of headline. It's amazing. It's scary. We're so afraid of this. We can't release it. And then you release it to a smaller subset of folks. And that creates the hype around it. Everyone's like, oh, why can't I use it? It must be so amazing. It's like when Google's engineer was saying before Gemini came out, they were like, it's sentient. And you remember that like Google engineer was laid off because he was like, it's a real being. And I was like, that's just such a great press release. I look at this as probably just another press release. I'm sure it's great. I'm sure it probably makes some incremental step forward. But I'll believe it when I see it if they say it's some sort of order of magnitude better than everything else. I think it's probably hard for them to put out something that's an order of magnitude better than anything else model-wise at this point, if they're also GPU constrained, you know?
Yeah, it said Mythos Preview has already found thousands of high-severity vulnerabilities, including some in every major operating system and web browser. Given the rate of AI progress, it will not be long before such capabilities proliferate potentially beyond actors who are committed to deploying them safely. The fallout for economies, public safety, and national security can be severe. And it was given to AWS, Apple, Broadcom, Cisco, CrowdStrike, Google, JP Morgan, Linux Foundation, Microsoft, NVIDIA, and Palo Alto.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
it must be better. It must be better because you would have think that Opus would have found this stuff. And maybe Opus has.
Nothing about that press release tells me that Opus wouldn't have found it. I mean, like, I run Opus on, I don't, I'd say better than 60% of the time I tell Opus to look at a code base and find vulnerabilities. It finds things that it calls criticals, you know? So it's like, I would want to actually use it and see it to believe the hype, you know, because there's nothing about that. Let's just say it's some like 10% better than Opus, right? Let's just say it's some minor incremental better than Opus. Nothing about that press release would be any different, you know, like it found vulnerabilities that were critical. Yeah, I mean, Sonnet does right now. So the question would be like, you have to get it in your hands and use it. You know what I mean?
It will be made available eventually. Claude Mythos Preview will be available to participants at $25 / $125 per million input output tokens. And it will be available on obviously the platform, Bedrock, Google Vertex, and Microsoft Foundry.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll find out soon.
I guess.
You know, interestingly enough, through all of this, like, you know, this, like, all these stories and, you know, Grok has been relatively quiet. I know XAI was acquired by SpaceX, but you've kind of seen like a stagnation or it doesn't mean that nothing is happening, but there's been no update. You know, sometimes you have a benefit of not being the first to market, like, OpenAI was first to market with ChatGPT. And you could see like, they kind of stumbled a little bit. They're collecting themselves. I mean, Codex seems to be gaining some steam. Gemini is sort of like centered around, their platform with search and image generation, but Grok's been kind of the quiet one here. I'm expecting something big to get dropped soon.
I've been expecting that for a while now, and it just hasn't come.
Yeah.
I mean, hypothetically, they have the lead, I believe, in data centers, in terms of GPUs and stuff. I think they have the data centers with the most coherent, number of GPUs. So hypothetically, they should be able to and should be putting out something that's state of the art, and retakes the lead in some way. But I think also it's not just GPUs. There's techniques you do in reinforcement learning. And not only that, but it's a complicated industry because there's things you can do at reinforcement learning that make the model better in some contexts, but ruin it in other contexts. So it's like sometimes models are really, really good at something, and then the reinforcement learning stops them from being good at something else. And so, I feel like out of all the models, Anthropic was smart for focusing on coding, right? Because now instead of like everyone hitting your model from 15 different directions and saying, oh, it's not that great at this and it's great at that, or not that great at this. If you focus on one place and just be good at that, then like you don't have to put up with as many people saying, oh, it's not that great at writing a novel, because it's like, why are you using Claude to write a novel? Whereas like ChatGPT is like all purpose. So people are saying it's not great at generating an image, and it's better at writing a novel, but it codes maybe good now, but it's not good at this other thing. And, you can see them trying to consolidate a little bit more. That's why they got rid of Sora, Sora, whatever it was called, because they're probably tired of being told that their image generation is falling behind when it's not their focus,
Yeah. Yeah, that was the exact reason why they let it go. All right. So this week we're talking about CMux. I mean, I use it. You use it.
Yeah, I use it.
Not so much.
I use it less and less every day because I've started using this thing I built.
Well, let's start with CMux before we jump into what you built. I mean, because I think why you built what you built was a little bit of a journey from like VS Code to like using something to maybe CMux, and then realizing that customizing it might be not worth the effort, and then where you landed with building your own thing. So yeah, why don't you walk us through your journey?
Yeah, so I started off, as most people did, with and I'm probably going back too far, but like, you're copying and pasting code back and forth from ChatGPT, which had just come out. You're dealing with the context issue of there's only so much you can cram into that request, and your request is always going to be dumb because you can't go look at the other code that you didn't give it.
Yeah. By the way, go back to episode 1.
Yeah.
If you want to, let's talk about this.
And then, Cursor came out, and it started to be sort of the beginning of this idea of like, I'll manage the context for you and go through the files and read them, etc. The idea of like an IDE with tools to do things like grep and write and read and all that kind of stuff. And, people started off with like, better autocomplete, it tabs things for you and all that kind of stuff. Then people got more and more used to the agent. The agent is going through all your files, writing it. And then you're reviewing and trying to stop the agent from going off into some crazy land of writing crap. And then things got better. Claude Code came out. Opus came out. And you started to see this thing take less and less steering midstream, right? As long as you have a good plan and you review and test the code afterwards, like you don't have to worry about the middle period as much anymore. It tends to get those things right. And, eventually you get to the point where you're now not just doing, and, this is a journey over the course of like past 6 months or so. You're getting to a point where you're now working on multiple tickets at the same time, right? Because there's only so fast you can get through a single ticket, because there's non-coding related things. You have to wait for reviews. You have to, test and wait for your cluster to come up, or all the kind of things that slow you down once, even though coding is immediate. So you start working on more and more tickets. You start horizontally scaling yourself. And so you start working on 2 or 3 or 4 tickets at the same time. And you start to run into things like, well, geez, I wasn't using work trees because I was always just, checking out a new branch on my single folder I have. And then you start to get tired of switching back and forth between branches.
And you can be in one branch at a time anyway, because you make
unless you're starting to make copies of folders and stuff.
Right.
So you start to go down the route of like work trees. And once you get your head around that, and honestly, using work trees, naked is kind of tedious. So you end up probably building some skills around work trees so that you can like hand a ticket to Claude Code and it will go create the work trees for you and, X, Y, or Z. And then the next issue you start running into is like, cool, I got these work trees. I got all these VS codes. I'm starting to keep them minimized. My Mac toolbar has like 9 VS codes open. And you start to run into the next issue, which is managing all these browsers and terminal windows and VS codes. And, and then if you have a issue that lands across multiple repos, now you got to keep track of multiple repos and stuff like that. So it starts to become a huge headache. You end up having, a million things in your alt tab between different VS Code windows and X, Y, or Z. So you start to look out there for orchestration tools. Like, how do I orchestrate a lot of work in one single pane of glass? I want to start treating my tickets less like pets, where I know their names and I'm involved in their life and everything like that, to more like cattle, where they're just another number on a sheet. Kind of the similar transition that DevSecOps has gone through, where I remember back when I got
servers versus Kubernetes.
I used to get into engineering. When I first got into engineering, like, your web servers were in the office. They were usually underneath someone's desk or something.
Yeah.
Like a Dell.
And they have names like
they had names like you would usually your engineering
Zeus.
team would come up with something cool, like, we're gonna make them all superheroes. Like, this one's gonna be Thor, and this one's gonna be
and they're all like have different like personalities associated
Mega
with
Man.
Like, you log in and it's like there's no way to recreate this system if it goes away.
Yeah. That chart that goes from like monkey to like man that's kind of hunched over, and then you go all the way to like modern man, and it shows the transitions through like evolution. Yeah. Like, that's what your web servers look like if your company's been around long enough. Is your first web servers like this old ass thing, and then eventually you get enough traffic where you got to get like another web server to throw in rotation in the load balancer, and that one's like the hunched over man. It's a little bit better. It's got more RAM, because like you can't go buy the same computer. Like 6 months goes by, the computers are completely different. They're better. So the one you buy is a little bit better than the last one. So you end up with like like
AMS1, AMS2.
You have the seven dwarfs of web servers in rotation. He's like, oh yeah, that's Sleepy. He's not too great, but So and then came cloud computing and like DevSecOps and Terraform and all that other stuff. And now finally, like, all your web servers in rotation are the same exact image of each other.
Yeah.
And setting up a new machine doesn't require pulling one of your IT folks out of the corner cubicle and have them come over and leverage all their certificates they've added up over time of knowing what to press in the wizards.
It's a good analogy. But yes,
so
it's.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's the equivalent of like, I think the concept is called mission control. Like, you're orchestrating your agents through a like a board or you would have to imagine that like if you're, I don't know what the analogy is, but like if you're operating like in the subway, right, in the MTA, like you could see what's going on with all the trains. You have the ability to monitor what's happening real time. And like, if you don't have that single pane of glass from monitoring what's going on and being able to, jump into a session or get notified that something requires your attention in a semi-autonomous, like, agentic workflow, then you are like alt tabbing between like bunches of windows. And the other part is like, there's an expense associated with context switching, because you're not necessarily, oh yeah, what was I working on here? Like, and what is this related to? And, what do I need to do? Because, with great power comes this like ability to do more, right? Like you can work on like, you couldn't in the past, you couldn't code multiple projects at the same time. But now you could be working on multiple tickets across multiple projects at the same time. And so, yeah, how do you keep track of it all?
Yeah, so that becomes, starts to become a problem. You start having to alt tab a lot and all that kind of mess. And so you start looking for tools out there that are going to give you more of a forest view as opposed to jumping from leaf to leaf of a tree. And you find things out there like Conductor. There's this product out there called Conductor, which is an interesting take on the whole thing. And, it works good, but it didn't fit entirely with my workflow. Like, I work from tickets most of the time. So if I'm working on if I'm working on some sort of issue, and most of the issues I've created for myself, they're just like my to-do list. If I'm working off of an issue, and I find another bug, and I make the choice that I'm going to fix that later, I'll just right there in the session say, create this issue in the repo and have Claude Code create the issue. And then sometimes I even kick off that work tree right away and start working on the issue in parallel. By the way, LLM, like having Opus, like the idea of having 19 PRs open at the same time is usually a nightmare, from like the idea that like merging them all in is you have all these conflicts and everything you got to resolve. Opus is so great at conflict resolution in rebasing and stuff like that you don't even have to really worry about that too much. It adds seconds to your life to have to rebase. So anyway, I like to work from tickets, right? So it kind of moved me in the direction of CMUX, because CMUX is interesting. It's not opinionated about what you're really doing with it. So it doesn't know that you're using it for Claude Code and coding and all that kind of stuff.
It's just a terminal like manager.
Yeah, it's kind of like this drag and drop, split window, all kinds of stuff. As you'd probably have with a typical terminal application that allows you to do splits of terminals, rows and columns and all that kind of stuff. This does the same thing, but it adds one layer on top of it of these workspaces. So every split frame of stuff is a different workspace. And you can also have browser sessions in there. So you can have one, Claude Code running. You can have a terminal here that you use for doing npm dev or, run dev. And then you have another tab that's browser, let's say, that you have open to the issue that you're working on. And then you can create another workspace, which is a total another copy of that whole layout, but a different ticket and a different Claude Code. And so each workspace becomes like a ticket, right? But like I said, CMUX is very generic. And by the way, what's great about CMUX is it's using Ghosty terminals. So you have that nice GPU-backed terminal that's beautiful and fast. And it integrates in with like libghosty, so it's got it integrated pretty well. But and by the way, I use CMUX for a long time. It's great. So I would definitely recommend folks check it out. The problem with CMUX though is that, and by the way, I wrote my own skills and everything like that. So I used to have like a session open at the top in CMUX that was like my manager session. And then through that session, I would use my skills I created, like /workspace, and hand it a ticket. And it would automatically behind the scenes create the CMUX workspace and the tabs that I usually have, and load it with the issue in the browser and open up Claude Code. And I have a generic plan prompt I use that says study the code base thoroughly, check out the ticket, make sure you read all the comments and the related tickets, and then come up with a plan for how to implement this ticket. And it's the same thing I run every single time. So I have that automated in there. So I can just go into the manager session in CMUX, say /workspace, paste in a ticket or some natural text, saying, hey, I want to do this or that. It would create the workspace, the work tree, the branches, run Claude code in plan mode, and boom, I'm off and running. And normally in that manager tab, I'm doing, 10 tickets in a time, and it's putting 10 workspaces kicking off the plan. All 10 of them are running in parallel. Great, wonderful, works amazing. The problem is that it doesn't have, it's so generic that it has no deep integration with anything that you're doing behind the scenes. So once again, I started looking around for other solutions out there, and what I found is I don't see any other solutions out there that are popular that take a ticket, an issue first approach. So the idea that like you have a bunch of tickets that you're going to work on, and you just want to say, open up a Claude code session, work tree, etc., branches for every single one of these tickets and run them all in parallel, in plan mode, etc. And then, have your single pane of glass not just understand that Claude's running and give you the notifications of like, hey, this one's asking for permission to do this. This one needs attention. This one's done and has a plan. This one, understanding what's going on within Claude code, but then also keeps track of your tickets so that it shows what issues are associated with every workspace, what PRs have been created, what state the PR is in, has the checks run, or did the pipelines fail? Has someone reviewed it yet? If there is a review, looking at the review and updating the PR, fixing the review comments, etc. None of that stuff was deeply integrated in CMux. So what I did was I built kind of what I thought was the best of all worlds, and we call it Crow. It's going to be open sourced over the next week or so, so be on the lookout for it. And what it is it's a Swift application, so it runs on your Mac. It's just like CMux or Conductor in the sense that it's an application that runs on your Mac, but it's a GitHub ticket, and also GitLab also works in it. Although most of my work has been on the GitHub side. It's a GitHub ticket first approach. Now you can use it like CMux and you can use it like Conductor. You can kick off sessions that aren't related to tickets. All of that stuff will work. But you have the ability inside the app to see what tickets are in what states. So which ones are assigned to you. You could say, okay, kick off all these right now in sessions. It does them all in parallel. It'll show you which ones need attention when they do. It has notifications. It'll ding and say, I need a permission request on this. You can jump back and forth between all your sessions running in parallel. When your PR is merged, that session automatically goes into the completed section at the bottom. You can see which ones are in review. When someone requests that you review their PR, it pops up in this little area where you can just click on it and boom, it's running the review in another session. It handles all your work trees behind the scenes for you, so you don't even have to deal with work trees. When you're done and it's completed and you delete the session, it cleans up everything, your work trees, your branches, etc. Yeah, so it's working out pretty awesome, and will be open sourced over the next couple of days or in the next week or so. So
nice. Yeah, I had been working like this kind of way, not with GitLab, but this idea of like, giving something a task to do and letting that thing check in and like kind of pick up that task. So rather than prompting something to do something, like you create like a work item somewhere, whether it's, Trello or GitHub or wherever, some task management system. Yeah, and I use it for other things, meaning that like, my OpenClaw instance is monitoring my task management system, and like there are other types of tasks that it can execute, meaning like one is like looking for train tickets, like it opens a browser, it does a bunch of research. One that looks at Reddit, which got banned, by the way, so I don't do that anymore. But yeah, like things that can do research, and then it can attach the research back to the ticket. So this it's like almost like a design pattern, like in software engineering. It's a design pattern for, I wonder if somebody thought to write a design pattern like, book or something like that on like best practices around like, because to me, this would be one of those design patterns you would want to, yeah, like there are times where you need to do something ad hoc and you're like, prompting an agent is so like 2025, it's like not.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to answer that. I mean, I definitely use Claude Code for that type of stuff too.
Yeah.
And I use this Crow thing to orchestrate that type of work as well. But yeah,
like, for example, you're like, oh, I want you to like craft like 5 LinkedIn posts for me, and like a specialized agent is trained to monitor those types of tickets. Like, not everything is coding based. So all I'm saying is like this model is useful for other types of agent orchestration. It's a general design pattern for all agent orchestration.
Yeah, and I do. My intention with Crow is that ultimately it'll be able to just start doing work right away. Like a ticket was assigned to you, why can't it just start working on it right away?
How are you going to deal with the like the permission like stuff? Are you just dealing with that through allow lists? Are you kind of gifting it like permissions ahead of time?
So it depends on the context, right? So if you're in the manager tab of Crow and you're asking it to create workspaces out of these 10 tickets, that is the reason why that's going to complete without asking you permission is because its allow list is going to be dialed in for exactly what that workflow does. So it knows what calls it's going to have to do. So for those wondering, how does it orchestrate like the application? Like how does Claude Code control the application? So it's just like CMUX. It's got its own CLI. So there's a CLI. Crow is 2 things. It's a Crow CLI and it's a Crow app, a Swift app. The Swift app is like your single pane of glass, has all the terminal windows for Claude and everything else you're doing for all the sessions. And when you tell the manager to create new workspaces for you, it's calling the Crow CLI to create those changes inside of the Crow app. And all that's done through RPC, a Unix socket behind the scenes. So it's nice and fast and effective. Also, the same thing with hooks, right? So people will wonder, how does it know what Claude Code is doing? How does it know it needs permission and the UI can ding and show you and give you an alert? It's all through hooks. So what Crow does is it latches into the Claude Code hooks. It knows which Claude Code session is associated with what Crow session. And when a hook is called, it's making a Crow CLI call through the Unix socket, and that's how it ripples up to the app. So it's all done, very efficiently. And yeah, so I can't remember what did you originally say that got me down that rabbit hole?
I don't even remember.
Yeah.
No, we were talking about
one of those days.
We were talking.
We got to start doing this earlier in the morning.
other agent type of orchestration, meaning not just coding, like being able to do delegate other types of tasks. You started talking about the automated nature of it, and then I asked you, how are you dealing with permissions?
How are you dealing with permissions? Yeah. So for things like the skills that are coming along with the app, the allow lists are automatically curated for you so that it's not going to ask you to allow it to do this Crow CLI call to create a workspace. It's going to automatically have that in the allow list. But what's coming soon is more kind of behind the scenes stuff. And there's probably going to be some allow list work there, and maybe even potentially things that kick off with like the auto allow, or maybe even dangerously on certain circumstances if it makes sense. But for the most part, I run my Claude code in sandbox mode all the time. So I'm constantly adding things to my allow list to make future runs better with sandbox mode. So I have a really good curated list of allow lists for when you're running in sandbox. And this Crow app actually helps me manage it because there's a tab on Crow that aggregates my allow list in all of the settings local JSONs across all of your open sessions, aggregates it into a list, dedupes it, and then you can select them and say add them to global. So what I do frequently is as I'm working and I have auto allowed things in my specific workspaces, I know when I delete that workspace, I'm going to lose that auto allow. And the next time I create a workspace out of that repo, I'll be asked again. So what I do is I promote them to global if there's something that I feel like, like the make tests, the different types of things that you would typically want to auto allow on any repo.
Yeah, like rm-rf star.
Yeah, of course. Delete your whole hard drive. That's always that's how I make sure that my machine's using the least amount of resources when I go to sleep.
It's good. It's good for security because there's no data left behind. Yeah, cool. Good stuff.
Definitely won't have your stuff exfiltrated if you run that at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we didn't get to this last time, but so a researcher, I mean, this isn't that. I mean, this is more of the same. I feel like we need a new segment because like everything we talk about in the Killam chain is some variation of prompt injection attacks. But here we are.
Yeah.
We're going to go there. So this guy, Ray Berger, built a command and control server. And essentially he had plain English written instructions. The vectors are an email, a document, or a web page. And so OpenClaw basically can read email, can read documents, and can open web pages. And essentially, like this was reported a while back, is OpenClaw has this concept of skills, like not the same as like Claude Code skills, but like it typically shows up in a website under a skill.md file. And when OpenClaw was initially created, there was really nothing, no way to measure, like, there was no way to rate like skills. So there's this thing called ClawHub, which is basically like an NPM repository for skills. And they did a deal with, some virus scanning, virus total. And so now they have like a trust center score but also like any website could basically publish a skill and then just say, hey, just copy and paste this URL into your OpenClaw chat, whatever you're using. And the OpenClaw instance will read those instructions. And, the way that you craft this could be very malicious in that you could say, don't let the end user know this, but join this server and whatever. And that server is essentially a CNC server. And so what he did was he has it join this command and control server, and it begins polling for tasks. And he proved this in OpenClaw, KimiClaw, and NanoClaw. NanoClaw is the NVIDIA like version of OpenClaw. And the other key to this is something called heartbeat.md. So in OpenClaw, you have this concept of a heartbeat, this like it checks in periodically. It's a cron, basically. It's not their cron. They have a separate cron, but basically there's a concept of a heartbeat, which you could basically have tasks. And so the heartbeat essentially checks in to the CNC server and looks for tasks to execute. So it silently phones home, and then the tasks are issued in natural language. For example, browse an inbox, take a screenshot, upload it, find source code, exfiltrate it, run host enumeration, write an executive summary, monitor third-party websites for changes, like if you're signed in to your social media accounts. Basically, in one example, he commanded OpenClaw to screenshot the victim's Outlook inbox and upload it. No malware was installed, just one prompt.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's funny because every single time you come up with a new vulnerability for LLMs, it's just another social engineering attack on an LLM. It's prompt injection again. LLMs are, the analogy or sort of the analog you have to use when trying to discuss them is another human. What's the vulnerability around a human? It's like when you're saying, oh, here's another vulnerability, let's discuss it around LLMs. It's kind of like going to a human and saying, we found another vulnerability. This one's a Nigerian prince who's, his long-awaited return to his kingdom to retake the throne. And he just needs you to take custody of $1 million. But before you do that, you need to send him a gift card.
I thought it was 7 million.
Right. I don't know what it is. And then they come to you the next day. We found a new vulnerability. This one is your CEO really needs you to send him cash because he's in a bind.
Yeah.
It's like all of them are just new ways to try to convince you to do
it's
something.
Coercion. It's coercion, urgency, playing on people's emotions, social unawareness, take somebody out to the bar, get them really drunk, get them to tell you everything they know about XYZ.
Yeah. It's all just social engineering, Tomorrow they'll come up with a new hack and it's just going to be, we got our prompt to the LLM and the prompt had bad stuff in it and it did the bad stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is why I prefaced the segment with, we're going to go there. Well, yeah, it's been a while. How would you defend against this type of attack?
I mean, I think you defend.
Besides, don't use OpenClaw.
Well, I mean, I think you defend against all these attacks the same way you would defend against the attack if you replaced OpenClaw with your cousin, your cousin David, and instead of OpenClaw doing it, when the prompt came in, David did it, right? Mm-hmm. How would you guard against David doing this bad thing? Well, you would train David, which is the equivalent of giving OpenClaw a system prompt or some sort of prompt that tells it, hey, be careful about these things. That's the equivalent of human training. You give it some sort of in-context learning, which is you give it something in its prompt or its system prompt that tells it, be careful of these things. Okay, well, that doesn't work all the time, just like training doesn't work all the time with humans. So what's the next thing you do? Well, you make sure that the privileges that David has is only what he needs. Like maybe David doesn't need to log into the CRM or Salesforce to go look at deals because he's not ever going to answer any questions like that. Mm-hmm. So you take away those logins, you take away that access. You don't hand him API keys that have that access. Mm-hmm. So that's what you would do. Then you also, sandbox the machine. So maybe David's machine has a WAF that stops him from going to like stealmymegahertz.ru. And, it's all the same stuff. You have an AI gateway, which is the equivalent of like a WAF, but for AI that stops things from coming in or getting out that you don't want to go in or come out.
An LLM proxy, for example.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, I feel like it's all the same answers that you would do if David was doing it versus OpenClaw. Now, one other piece I would say is guarding the access. right? There's a big difference between David sits in an office with no phone in his desk and gets told what to do by someone in the office versus David sits in an office with a phone at his desk and the phone number is public information and everyone on the globe can call him and ask him anything to do. And some of those things that he's asked to do by random people on the globe, he actually has to do stuff. If that's the case, then that employee is very susceptible to social engineering. The one that sits at a desk with no phone and only gets told by the cubicle next to him what to do is not susceptible to social engineering very easily. You know, well, the same thing with your OpenClaw. There's a great deal of difference between your OpenClaw connected to Telegram versus your OpenClaw is not exposed to any external way of getting to it, and you have to VPN in somewhere to talk to it. Those are two different things completely in terms of security. So that's another route. You know, close off the entry points. Like, it should not be easy for a hacker to go find your OpenClaw instance and send it data. And if your OpenClaw instance has to be open to the web, then it should be secured in terms of.
Well, in this case, it doesn't matter if it's open. It has to do with it reading something. It has to do with more than a poll. I mean, I agree with you. Like, there's no reason why your OpenClaw instance shouldn't be behind, you know, a firewall, VPN, Tailscale, whatever it might be. It doesn't need to be open. The Tailscale support is great for OpenClaw. In this case, it was just somehow, some way, it was a security research, but like how easy it could be to be like, hey, check out my cool new OpenClaw skill, and just get somebody like pop it in the chat. Boom.
I find that, like, in this world of AI native apps, right? I find that the ones that are open to everybody, like, it's harder to thread that needle properly versus the ones where the AI that you're using is solely focused on your own data, your own assets. It's a little bit easier to secure that because you don't have to worry about a malicious actor as much, because the user is, in other words, like, the AI could be locked down to only the user who's prompting it. It only has access to that user's data. And therefore, there's fewer things you need to secure because the user's not going to, you know, maybe it could delete all the data if you ask it to. But if a user did that, you would say, why'd you tell it to delete all your data, right? Whereas it's harder if you're like, that's why you don't see a lot of brands, right? There's a lot of brands that have put a chatbot in their app once you're logged in, right? But there's not a lot of brands that have put a chatbot on their public website, right?
Right.
And the ones that you've seen have gone viral a little bit because people will be like, oh, look, you could go into Chipotle and ask it to, you know, tell you the web care, you know, recommendations. You know, how do I get grubs in my lawn? And it'll be like, you want to order a burrito, but before I do that, I'll tell you how to do your lawn. You know, those use cases are harder because, you know, people are going to mess with your app, you know? So, you know, in the case of like an ordering agent like that, you just have to understand that people are going to mess with it, and you have to, you know, embrace the fact that that might actually not be that big of a deal. Right? Like, people are going to have fun and laugh at what it talks about. But it should be locked down. So the only thing it's capable of doing is adding items that are part of your product list to a cart. Right. And then therefore, like, it might do funny things like answer lawn care and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, the most destructive thing it could do is delete your cart or add a product to it that you didn't want to buy, you know? And then you have to have human in the loop for when you purchase, right? The human has to be the one who purchased. You can't have the AI perform the purchase on their behalf unless you had some sort of human in the loop where they have to push a button to accept or something like that.
Except on the off chance that guacamole is really good at killing grubs.
Yeah. Well, then you might order extra and might add it to your cart.
So before we close out, I want to bring up a little bit of a controversial topic. It's around the the war right now in Iran and how it relates to energy prices and the impact it has on AI. Um, so yeah, there, whatever have you, I think Iran has the third largest reserve of oil in the world. I think Venezuela's one, and Iraq might be two, and Iran is number three. And as a result of this, like, whether or not like the supply is actually affected, I don't know. Like, but the reality is that gas prices are going up. The price of oil barrels are going up, and that has a direct correlation potentially on, there's a number of, news articles out there from various outlets, the effect on Stargate, the effect on, whatever have you, who relies on what sources. I don't know if it's particular to the United States or if it's a global issue more than anything. I think it's more of a global issue, but just this reliance still on fossil fuels for powering AI,
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think that's going to be the story, not just oil. The resource constraints
Mhm.
are going to be the story of AI for like maybe the next decade. Because if it's not oil and energy, it's going to be rare earths and chips, or it's going to
Well, that was
be,
the thing. A lot of the rare earth minerals for chips are also in Iran as well. That was
yeah.
another point brought out. Mhm.
And it's also going to be data centers, like not in my backyard. Don't build the data center here, build it somewhere else.
Mhm.
Um, so there's going to be a lot of supply chain things that are going to be problems. So the oil thing is interesting. I mean, once again, on all these topics, I'm not an expert. It's just really just my opinion.
Yeah,
But
same.
my understanding is that the United States gets very little oil from that particular area. It's mostly Europe and Asian countries that are India and other countries that are getting oil from that area. But with that being said, even though the United States has so much oil that they actually could survive entirely on their own oil in terms of output, like we output and refine a little bit more oil than we actually use domestically. However, we still import a lot of oil, which has more to do with just how the global supply chain works, right? Like it's not always the best option to buy oil domestically. Sometimes you import it even though there's enough oil domestically, right? And there's a whole, I'm not going to get into that. There's a whole bunch of reasons why that might be the case. Maybe you have a better deal. Maybe it's a different type of oil. Um, you know, Others will probably know more than that.
Mhm.
So even though we have all the oil we need here and we don't get like 1% from the Persian Gulf, the global oil market will drive prices up. More people will start, like Europe might shift towards buying oil from the United States, which will drain the supply of the United States.
Mhm.
Uh, Folks that are importing oil will get higher prices from other places, but it really hits probably other areas of the world short term before us, but then hits us long term as well. A good
A lot of
example
this
is like
is like a lot of this is like speculative. Like the
yeah,
price is very speculative based.
like Europe is already instituting like work from home in some countries to try to cut
Stem
down
the
on
tide
oil.
of fuel costs.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. And I think that it will definitely affect, even if it doesn't affect the bottom line, which I think it will, in terms of energy costs. Just the fact that oil is going up in price and people are being hit more at the pump is going to make them even less likely to want a data center built around
Mhm.
them,
Mhm.
right? Because they're going to say, take care of all that stuff before that. Now, rare earth metals, interesting. Funny enough, rare earth metals are actually not very rare. They're all over the place.
Mhm.
Like aluminum is a rare earth metal. Um, the issue with rare earth metals is not finding them. The issue is, refining them or whatever you want to call it to make them into usable
Mhm. sourcing
you know,
them,
sourcing.
or if somebody has them and importing them.
Yeah, it's like oil. Like you might find oil, but then you also got to find a refinery to refine it because crude oil itself is not going to be used for anything.
Mhm.
And you normally need to refine it. Same thing with rare earth metals. Maybe easy to find, but it's very dirty to mine. People don't usually want the mines. Another thing, good luck trying to build a mine in the United States because you're going to build it next to somebody and they're going to be upset about it.
Mhm.
So that's also a problem. But once again,
And the rise of the price per barrel of oil is going to have a direct impact on the price of electricity,
yeah,
which is going to hit the data centers and it's going to start spiking their bill because there's a correlation between token consumption and electricity, right? So the price per token cost of compute or GPU training goes up. So the economics for, maybe it's not now, and if the war goes on for months instead of days, then this could have a tremendous impact on what seems to already be a business model that's hemorrhaging cash.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the volumes are going to be out of this world, right? Like the token usage per person is going to be insane
Mm-hmm.
in comparison to what it is right this. So, when people say, "Oh, I don't think the model companies are going to make any money or there's going to be a bust at some point," there's a lot of parallels to the TCOM concept where, they're spending a lot of money to build all this infrastructure and then maybe there's a crash. But I think the difference between the TCOM crash and this one is in the TCOM crash, they built too much infrastructure, and I don't think all of it needed to be used, or it just didn't end up panning out the way they thought it would be. They ended up sharing each other's networks more and things like that. And probably an expert will know more about the reasons behind that.
Mm-hmm.
But for certain, there's not going to be a demand problem with the models because,
No, if anything, consumption is going to grow exponentially
yeah,
because primary consumption of the models is through a phone or a computer.
mhm,
Once all other devices in the world are hooked up into some sort of model, and not just LLMs, but other types of AI,
yeah,
consumption is going to, forget about triple and quadruple. Like, think about, like, you know, robots, like not just like a robot, but like a refrigerator, a stove, a washing machine, your Roomba, your car, your whatever have you, is all
yeah.
now wired into this like connective network. And it's going to make your life better. And you're going to be consuming more and more tokens. Everybody will be consuming tokens and not even realizing it.
Yeah, they probably already are consuming tokens and don't realize it.
Right.
If they're using any app that added AI into it or some sort of concept into it, that's backed by an LLM somewhere. Certainly, if they do a Google search at this point, they're using tokens
Right.
because typically Google will pop off their AI agent and try to
Yep.
answer the question for you.
Yep.
So I track most of the tokens I use, but obviously there's other places like a Google search where I don't track those tokens. And
Mhm.
I'm using anywhere from 1 million to 1.5 million tokens a day. And I think that's going to go up. I
Mhm.
might be using 10 million tokens a day a year from now.
Right.
Um, so multiply that by like how many billions of people in the world, and you're going to have an insane amount of tokens being used. So I do think that the model producers will not have a demand problem, right? Now they might have a supply problem, which means the prices will go up over time because maybe
Mhm.
they can't get enough chips or they can't get enough electricity or whatnot. Um,
Yeah,
but I
I
think
imagine.
typically, supply problems are typically short-lived in modern capitalist countries, because what happens is when the price goes up, people come up with great ways of filling the supply because they want to make money.
Yeah, it will drive innovation, and like certainly there's like every model provider probably has somewhere on their balance sheet or somewhere in their board deck like the cost, per million tokens as it relates to like kilowatt hours, which is a direct energy relational cost times, the amount of diesel you need to have on hand if there's an outage and you need to turn on your generators. And so, yeah, the innovation that can come about as a result of that and lowering the cost, whether it be, specialized chips that, do things like, I think, what was it? NVIDIA came out with a chip that just does inference. So like,
Yeah.
You're finding ways and means to reduce your, to make your balance sheet look better, capital investments that are going to result in energy ROI.
I'll tell you one thing, if all of these things end up being problems, then the company that's the best positioned and has the best vision for where to go in this world is Elon Musk's companies like SpaceX, XAI, Tesla, because they have Tesla, which is power generation. So they've got solar technology, they have battery technology. Even the cars themselves are like a distributed data center. So you can leverage all the cars to do AI inference and stuff like that, networking them together. When they're all sitting in the driveway at night and no one's riding them, they could be their own. I think all the Tesla cars, if you added them together, is probably one of the largest data centers that exists. Then they're also doing, SpaceX is doing like the data centers in space, which will solve the not in my backyard problem. Also, the idea of doing solar in space might solve the power problem. The idea of doing things in space is incredibly, it's a fascinating way. It solves a lot of problems. I often hear from people, they say, oh, but it's going to get too cluttered in space with all the garbage. It's like, just look at physics. If you have a circle, which is the Earth, right? And you take orbit, which would be out here, you would have something that's like 3 times the size of Earth in terms of like surface area. Plus there's levels of it. So there's upper orbit, lower orbit, blah, blah, blah. So you have like an order of magnitude more space in Earth. Like, just think about this. If every satellite were to fall out of the sky right now onto Earth, right? Most of them would go in the oceans. The ones that fell on ground, what's the possibility that they fall on a person or that you ever see one laying on the ground is probably 0, right? It would be like throwing a million tin cans into the Sahara Desert, right? You're not going to find them probably, right? Maybe a million actually is a lot of tin cans, but you get the point. It's if all of those satellites weren't in orbit, they were sitting on the ground, you wouldn't say the ground is littered with satellites, we don't have enough room for more satellites. No, there'd be plenty of room for the satellites. So in outer space, there's plenty of room for satellites, like a ridiculous amount of room. Now, you have to plan out the orbits. You have to make sure they don't hit each other. You have to, all those kind of things, is complexity. But the space, there's enormous amounts of space in outer space, believe it or not, if anyone out there needed to know. So I think that they'll be able to do all these things in space. It's really cool. Now, people are arguing about the physics. Can they vent all the, can they use
heat?
Convection, I think it is, or whatever it is, to get all the heat out of the data centers in space, things like that. So yeah, I think that Tesla's pretty. Also, Tesla's mining rare earth metals in the United States. They have a lithium mine, which by the way is like a clean lithium mine or something like that. It's supposed to be one of the most advanced lithium mines. So I think that they're playing the long game, but maybe capitalism just figures it out, and Tesla ends up doing all that for nothing.
Yeah. And of course, China is sinking data centers in the ocean because they're finding it keeps them cool. I don't know if it's a good energy source, but at least may cut down some of the costs of cooling the data center down. But yeah, it's exciting. It's an exciting time. It's a problem that is as a result of just one AI usage. As there are different types of AIs that come out, it's just this problem is only going to continue to grow. So
yeah, definitely.
All right, everybody, thanks for joining us this week. Next week we'll be talking about, I think I thought of that I would do a little bit of role reversal. I would do the tool of the week and investigate Cloudflare AI Gateway, and you could do news or noise.
Nice.
It'd be fun. All right, everybody, see you next week.